God. And apologize for the lights, by the way. I know it's a little brighter than it normally is in here, but once again we have some technical issues we're dealing with. But I really the more and more, longer and longer I've lived, the more and more I've realized how important this is. And it sounds, and maybe you hear this theme and it's like walking with God. That sounds kind of boring. I'd rather run. I'd rather ride a roller coaster with God. I don't want to walk with God. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know that's dumb, and my wife would make fun of my humor. But um, I know it may not sound like the most exciting thing, but I have found it to be incredibly powerful when you understand the biblical metaphor of walking and how important it is to walk with God, especially if I am being honest about how what life is really like. All right. So first of all, I want to start by if you are going through like the 12 steps, for example, this would tie in with step 11, talking about how through prayer and meditation, seeking to improve conscious contact with God. So that it could be a tie-in. So if you're familiar, that's kind of where I'm. If you're in the 12 steps, that's kind of where I'm pointing at. But I want you to think about this. What relationships in your life are you working on the hardest? I think this is where I want to start, having you think about this. What relationships are you working the hardest on? Now, I find people spending a lot of hard work oftentimes, sometimes not. It all depends on your situation, your energy level, your emotional state. But I see a lot of people that work, they're working hard on their marriage because things are rough, or working hard on their relationship with their kids. Or I see people even working like crazy to improve their relationships with people at work or their boss. But there's hardly ever any time to work on a relationship with God. And I can tell you that even as a pastor, I'm Pastor Ben. Even as a pastor, I have found this to be true, that sometimes I even get so busy working on relationships with others, working on, and oftentimes doing what I do, that I'm not actually walking with God, and I'm not working on my relationship with God. And I believe that God initiates the relationship, but like any relationship, there is something that if I'm just doing my thing, ignoring God, well, my relationship with Him is not going to grow. I'm going to share something. Some of you heard me talk about this last Thursday at my Bible study. I'll share it again. But understand, I'm not going to. This is not the only story I'm going to share. But last month, I found myself feeling kind of drained. I was just kind of, I felt, I would say spiritually drained. We had a really busy month here at Shepherd Lakes. We had all the events that we have going on at the very beginning of the year. You kick off the year with church activities, all these other things. We had a whole weekend. We had a picnic, a 5K run. We had this huge day, with kicking off everything. And then we had a year celebration at Genesis, which was awesome the week after that. Put a lot of work in. It was awesome. But I was toast afterwards. I was so tired. And it wasn't just physically. I was spiritually drained because I'd been kind of busy, sharing God's love, talking about God with teaching Bible studies, all these things, but I wasn't really being fed myself. And so I decided, what I'm going to do, and this came from a pastor friend of mine, actually two pastor friends of mine. We talked about this. We said, what have you ever thought about taking like a spiritual retreat? I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And he said, well, taking a day where you just spend time with God. As a pastor, if you're going to share God with others, you need to spend some time with God. It's important. And we were all talking. We were realizing like how much all of us were kind of craving more of that time. So I did that. I planned a day in September. I'm sorry, and I've decided every month I'm going to do this. But I planned my first one in September, and I found myself on a beautiful lake, with my Bible in hand, and I was gonna pray, and I was going to get into the Bible and study and do spiritual stuff, right? And I realized after about an hour, I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm not saying that to like, what, it's just, but it's we get so used. It's like I would compare it to like, like a marriage relationship where everybody gets busy, so busy doing their own thing that suddenly it's like, who are you anymore? I don't even know you because we never talk. And it felt like that to me. Like I hadn't been talking to God. I hadn't been I'd been working on my spiritual practices, but I hadn't been talking to him, and I found myself, and I really spent the day just kind of saying, wow, this is something I really need to do. And so actually tomorrow is going to be my second spiritual retreat that I'm taking, and this is something I realized that I needed to work on, because I was emptying my cup so much, I wasn't filling it. And I guess what I wanted you to think about was your own spiritual relationship with God. And I know that for many of us, we're all in different places here. Some of us in this room I know are probably, you're probably maybe trying to figure God out a little bit. Maybe you have been away for a while, and who God is, you're still working through that maybe. And that's maybe a conversation I would love to have with you. Maybe you do have a better idea of who God is, but you just don't quite know how to make that a regular part of your life, and you're working on that right now. And some of you, I've seen this. It's awesome. Like we had 21 people in Bible study last Thursday. It was awesome. I mean, this has been every week we've had in the 20s now for the last couple of weeks. And it's just great seeing people wanting to hear God. It's not about Pastor Ben. It's about hearing what God has to say and how that applies to my life. And it helps you grow. And it's difficult, especially living in the world that we live in. Because, how do you handle adversity? I think this is the big part, because when I say that I was spiritually drained, I was facing adversity. And it came at a time I didn't expect it. I guess I should have expected it because it was a busy time. So I should expect there to be adversity, but I'm like, whatever. Oh, I'm spiritually drained. My wife's looking at me like, yeah, of course you are. So it happens oftentimes when you least expect it, even if you should. And this is what society, I would say, oftentimes tells us, though. Like, this is the general feeling I get from the culture. If you have stress, or if you're dealing with adversity or suffering or struggles of any sort of kind like that, you need to learn to manage it. Okay? You need to manage your stress, your struggles, your anxiety. You need to learn how to reduce it, maybe take it away. Okay? And then the last one maybe be cope. Okay, so you understand, so managing would be, moving the pieces around. So you have a struggle in your life, the first thing you need to do is learn how to move the pieces around to where they need to be. That's number one. Or maybe you're just stressed out. Maybe the main thing you need to do is just reduce. Okay, that's the thing you need to do. You need to reduce the things you're doing, the number of things you're doing. You need to reduce the negative influences in your life. Or maybe you just need to cope. Suck it up. It's just the way it is. That's the way the world is. Cope with it, You get that a lot of times. And so I'll give you kind of a list of some things you oftentimes hear, if it fits in line with this. Avoid negative thoughts, which is a good thing. I would say avoid them, but good luck. Buffer yourself with time off. People say that. Make sure you take the right amount of time off. Okay, that's good. Exercise. Make sure you take care of yourself, right? Find supportive relationships. Okay, that'll fix everything. No, don't get me wrong. I'm being sarcastic here. You know that about me. These aren't bad things in and of themselves as I'm going through. So keep that in your mind. Okay, so find supportive relationships. Problem solve. Okay, you got a problem. There has to be a solution, just like a math equation. You just got to figure it out, right? Learn to accept the things you can't change. Okay, these are all things that we hear, and that are very good things. But the problem is this. Any one of those things, I think, can become ultimate things. The solution, the basis, the foundation. They can be great helps. And that's why I always say that Genesis, I don't see this as a program. Because I don't see Genesis program as a thing that's here to fix people. It's a community where all people who are struggling in many different ways, myself included, gather together around the one that I believe can offer hope, healing, and growth, can walk with you through your struggles. And while these other things are great, and they can help you, I guess, think through things, like avoiding negative thoughts. Yeah, that's great. If I'm walking around negative all the time, of course it's not going to be a good thing. But there are going to be days where those negative thoughts are going to creep in, whether I want them to or not. I know that it's good to learn to accept the things I can't change. I need to, but there are going to be days where I'm not going to want to accept them. So where do I turn? Well, I want to give you a little analogy. You ever seen one of these really cool storm fronts in the distance, like when you're driving? You see something like that, you might want to turn the other direction, actually. But we kind of treat suffering and struggles and trials in life like they're a storm front, UFO. You look at this and it's like, okay, I should probably just go the other direction, avoid it. Or, I should, predict what's going to happen. I should predict which way is it going, which way is the wind going, got to go that way, I'll go the other way around. Well, if that's coming directly toward me, well, just go to your basement, find some shelter, right? There's a limit to this analogy, because every single one of us in this room, myself included, will find ourselves at a point in our lives where figuratively speaking, we're in the middle of a field with a gigantic storm coming towards us, and there is no escape. I hate to say that because it's harsh to think about that reality, but it's the truth. And society our culture would say, ignore that truth. Just, live in the now, pretend that nothing will ever get difficult in life, and when it does, you need to avoid it, you need to fix, you need to control, do all these things I talked about, But hold on. I can't always manage. I can't always control. And so that, I think for this reason, walking is an incredibly important analogy. It's an incredibly important metaphor, I should say, that the Bible uses for dealing with suffering. The Bible talks over and over and over about how suffering is something to be walked through. And you see, it doesn't mean that it doesn't talk about walking. Doesn't mean that I can escape it or get away from it. It means that I'm going to go through it, but there is, I guess you could say, progress or growth. That something is going to happen. That I'm going somewhere at the same time. Let me kind of explain to you what I mean here. Psalm 23, verse 4 says this, and just to give you a picture. Very well known line, a lot of people know. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, once again, it's not like if I go through the valley of the shadow, it's like when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, when I'm walking through it, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So the idea is that life will have some valleys, and I'll be called to walk through it. The important thing to understand here, and this is also a biblical understanding, is that there will be the suffering will have an end. Okay, the suffering will have an end, and at the same time, while you're going through the suffering, God says, "I will be with you." One other one, and actually, what you do get is some interesting understandings of how God walks with us. You'll hear some people say things, and actually, last Thursday at the Bible study, some of the women at the women's Bible study, they're reading a book, and in the book, it talked. The author of this book told a story about how she was at this women's conference. She's blind. The woman who wrote this book is blind, and she went to this conference, and she was going to be the big speaker. Okay, and she found out when she got there that the people at this conference believe that if you have strong enough faith, God will heal you. And she's like, I am blind. I've been blind my whole life. And so you're telling, basically what you say, you're saying that I don't have strong enough faith. Okay? So apparently God's not with me. I don't have strong enough faith. And so because I'm going through this suffering, through this trial in my life, and that means that I don't, it's something to do with me. The point she was making is that that's not how God walks with us. He doesn't promise that we'll be exempt from suffering. She's blind. She can't do anything about it. God's not miraculously healing her. But God does promise to walk with her through it all. Let me point out Isaiah chapter 43 to you, because I think this is a very good, helpful, giving a little more depth to this. It says this. Once again, you'll see the imagery of walking, and this time they're walking through fire, walking through water. And fire and water should be understood as trials in life. So when you pass through the waters, when you pass through trials, God says, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. Okay? And in ancient times, rivers would be Very dangerous. They flood. They killed people. They destroyed crops. It was very dangerous. That's a major trial. You notice that when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. When. Doesn't say if. Once again, when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Two things, of course, like I pointed out already. When you walk through, it's not if, but when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. And the point is this, the fire may hurt, it may not be fun, it may not be pleasant, but when I walk with you, it will not utterly destroy you. Even if that fire is fatal, God's promise is that I will bring you out the other end. That's the message of Jesus, which we'll touch on in a little bit later. And of course, it says in 43, verse 5, "Fear not, for I am with you. Do not be afraid. I am with you as you walk through whatever this trial, whatever this fire might be." All right, so we're going to add a little more depth now. Okay, so walking through the fire. Let's talk about the fire itself a little bit. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7, it says this. Like trials, it says, whenever you face various trials, the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes through it, is tested by fire, that it may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. I'll go up actually a little bit further. Didn't mean to cut it off so early. But it says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." All right, so let me help you with this imagery. Peter wrote this. He was a disciple of Jesus, and he was speaking to people who were a lot of people believe he was speaking to people who were being burned alive, thrown into lions' dens, all sorts of crazy things. This was when Nero was the emperor of Rome, okay? And so he's talking to people whose livelihood, think about the things that they're being tested in, the things that are being taken away. Their livelihood, their relationships, social standing, all things that we value. All these things were threatened, in some cases completely taken away. And he depicts adversity, challenges, and suffering as kind of a fire, like a furnace. A furnace, okay? So what he's saying is that these trials that you're enduring, that you're walking through, it's like you're walking through a furnace. And what is the purpose of a furnace? And he talks about gold, okay? This really is a very helpful analogy, so please pay attention to me, okay? What happens when gold gets put into a furnace is it melts. It's not destroyed, okay? It's melted. And what happens in gold, the reason why people do this is because the imperfections in the gold will either be destroyed when it's forged, when it's put into that furnace, and at the same time, either the imperfections will be destroyed or the imperfections will actually rise to the surface and they can skim it off. Okay? And then what emerges is gold that's been refined, that's purer than it was before. Do you understand the analogy now? When you're tested, when you're walking through the fire and God walks with you, what happens is you emerge from the fire different from when you first entered it. Truth is, we all have impurities. You might be someone today that says, I believe in Jesus. I have strong faith in God. You might be in a different place in your life and you're struggling, like I said before. But no matter how strong your faith is, there's always something else mixed in with it. There's always something else that you're trusting in. Okay, I love God. God's great. Jesus saved me. I believe that I'm saved by God's unconditional love. It's not about me. But in the back of your mind, you're also thinking things like, well, that job would sure help. My relationship, well, if that would be better, that would sure help. I really need to work on that. Those are good things, but remember, start focusing on other things. Or maybe you're feeling a bit prideful. Look where I am today. What happens then when you face adversity is once again you're humbled, kind of brought down your knees and reminded of, how a relationship with God really works and why He is the most important relationship. I wanted to read you two quotes from Tim Keller, which I really love these quotes. He said, like fire working on gold, suffering can destroy some things within us and can purify and strengthen other things. Or not. It depends on our response. What he's saying is this. When you face adversity, if you're walking with God, some of those impure things will be destroyed and you'll actually emerge on the other side a different person, probably stronger because of it, because God was walking with you. But if you're turning away from God and you're like, I'm going to do this on my own, oh my goodness. Doesn't usually end up very well. If anything, you might end up the other side if you do emerge a prideful person. Or you might find yourself focused on something else, some other addiction or some other destructive behavior, whatever it might be. He says the fiery furnace does not automatically make us better. We must recognize, depend on, speak with, and believe in God while in the fire. God himself says in Isaiah 43, which I just read, that he will be with us, walking beside us in the fire. Knowing him personally while in our affliction is the key to becoming stronger rather than weaker in it. Some of you have spoken to me and you've said things like, the pain in my life really woke me up and it changed me. And I know that many of you would say that where you are now is so much different from where you were because you've been in the furnace. You've been there and you're a different person. And that I can relate to that. My story is different from many others, but I've told you before about how I was 18. My dad had cancer at 45 years old, and I had to deal with all of this stuff. And I was not walking with God really at that time in my life. I knew about God. I had basic ideas. Jesus saved me. But so I let you in a little secret. How I got through that were the people that surrounded me who were walking with God. And they taught me how to walk with God. And they pointed me to God. And specifically, they pointed me to Jesus. And this is exactly kind of how I view myself now. I view myself in a position where I still have adversity, and I need to continue walking with God myself, while also, just as many of you have and continue to do, helping others sometimes when they're at adversity, pointing them to their true Savior, and helping them to understand what it means to really walk with God. And I'm guessing, I don't think there's anybody in this room that has it all figured out. I've already admitted that I don't have it figured out 100% right now. But I'm working on it. The gospel is the main point here. So like Tim Keller said, when you're walking, okay, we can't avoid everything else. When that adversity comes and I'm walking through the furnace and I'm being, and my hope is I'll somehow be refined by this thing that maybe I don't want to be going through at all. When I'm going through that, how am I looking at God? If I walk through that furnace and the gospel, the good news of Jesus is not on my mind, if that's not how I look at God, if I don't look at Jesus hanging on a cross, then what's going to happen as I walk through that furnace is I'm going to either despair, hate myself, hate the world, or I'll turn to God and I'll hate him. That's just the way, this is me sharing. Without Christ, God is some heartless, distant, uncaring being that just lets this stuff happen. Even if it's my own fault. And if it is my own fault, then if God's not in the equation, then I'm just going to beat myself over the head. I tend to do that sometimes. I'll beat myself up. I don't know if you fit into that category. Some people tend to beat others up. Some people tend to beat themselves up. That might be the case. But you see, if you go through that furnace, if you face adversity with Christ in mind, if you understand God revealing himself ultimately through Jesus, what you understand is that God, this is what God did. He tossed himself into a furnace. He said, you know what? These people are hurting. They are broken. They are lost. And so he dove headfirst into that furnace and allowed himself to be burnt up. Jesus from the cross said something that through faith in Jesus I never have to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because of Jesus, I know that God has not abandoned me, no matter how bad my circumstances might be. But Jesus on the cross was abandoned. God allowed his son to die. When you look to Jesus, as you go through adversity, you're talking to God, you're walking with him through it all, that fire, it will only make you stronger. See? Because God is with you. Jesus understands, believe it or not. He knows how hard this world can be. God knows. He understands. And he walks with you literally through it. So what does it look like? What does walking with God look like? Well, here's some three suggestions I'd offer. And like I said, I'm still working on it myself. If you have some spiritual practices that are beneficial, that help you, I'm an open book too. I like to share ideas. Like I said, I sit down with my pastor friends and I like to talk about it. But I like to talk about it with others too. I know some prayer warriors out there that love to get out there and dig into the Word, and they have their own ways of doing it. But number one here, repeated actions that you can sustain. I always run into people. I quite frequently run into people that they suddenly see God in a new way, and then you just jump in head first, and suddenly you're like, I'm going to do everything. And so these are sometimes people I would categorize as people that volunteer for everything at church. They're doing everything, involved in everything, just everything has, and what happens is you burn out. You see? It has to be sustainable. Or in your personal life, what you do, I've seen this as well, is I'm going to read like 6 chapters of the Bible every day. And so I'm going to read through the entire Bible, but you're not patient. I'm not a very patient person sometimes. Like, I want to get done in one swoop, Is it sustainable every single day to read through like 8 chapters of the Bible? You tell me, There you go. So it's not easy for everybody to do. So number 2, this is what I would suggest, being part of a community, as I talk about Genesis. Being part of a community where you can be gathered around other people. It's consistent. It's every week. You come here, you're going to hear about God, and you're going to learn, hopefully. My prayer constantly is that I can help people learn to walk with God as I continue to learn myself. Second one is Bible study, being active in Bible study. I believe Bible study is huge because as I've talked with so many of you about, where do I start? Some of you are very well versed in the Bible. I love talking to you. Some of you have struggled a little bit more and you don't know where to start. And that's why I've said, for example, in my Bible study, we've been going through Luke. Just read Luke. Just get to know the book of Luke. We're starting there and just work through it. Just consistently come, learn, and grow, and ask questions. There is no such thing as a dumb question, and we grow together. And finally would be your own personal daily readings, devotional life, prayer. Do you find quiet space for yourself to talk to God? This is awkward, right? Quiet? There's always got to be noise. When you got these things in your pocket, when you got computers on, kids running around the house, Melissa and Angela, it makes it hard. It makes it hard to find that time. But you need it for yourself, for the sake of your relationships with others. I truly believe, at least I know that I need to have that relationship with God for the sake of my relationship with other people. He grounds me. He centers me. And finally, number 3, walking with God is characterized by slow, steady growth. I've told you before that I think everybody wants to go right to growth. I'm an impatient person. I want to see change in my life. I want to see things happening right now. But that's not typically how life works. As many of you know, you've been through adversity, you know that pain and hardship. There's ups and downs, there's relapses, there's going through that same vicious cycle again, there's new arguments, new struggles, new difficulties in life, always constantly coming up. And that's why walking with God through it all is so important. As you walk with Him, I truly believe that, as I said before, if you look to God as God defines Himself, you will see growth. You will see yourself being strengthened in ways that you never probably ever expected. I really truly believe that walking with God is an important thing, and this is something that I've kind of dedicated myself to do more study on and learn more about. You'll probably in March find some series based on walking with God and talking different types of walking with God. We'll probably get into something like that in March, because I've found in my own life how important this is, and I really feel strong, very passionate about helping you, if I at all possibly can, walk with Him as well. And if there's a struggle that you're going on, that's going on in your life right now, if there's some part of the Christian faith that you don't get, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Don't know if I can help you, but I'd love to try. And just as I know that many of you have helped me and blessed me in a whole variety of ways.